Hello and welcome to another episode of Ageless with me, Dr. Jonquille Chantrey, a podcast uncovering the truth about healthy aging, mindset, and medical aesthetics. Did you know that according to the latest Ofcom report, 51% of UK adults now get their news mainly through social media? This majority rises in millennials and to over 80% in Gen Zs. So when it comes to aging, health span and aesthetics, actual medical topics, many people's first exposure to the science isn't necessarily through doctors, proof, or medical journals. It's through influencers, algorithms, and amplified social media marketing. And while many are well-intentioned, false information in these subjects is spreading faster than ever. The World Health Organization has gone so far as to class this as a global health threat. For me, medical clarity and pro-identity approaches to intelligent aging and aesthetics are fundamental. So today we're examining the hype, what's real in aging science, what's just marketing, and how can you make sense of it all. Consumer confusion due to social media and hearsay are things I'm regularly confronted with inside my clinic. But beyond the walls of my clinic, I see there's a fundamental breakdown of trust in medical fields that should be built on science and credibility. And this ripple effect can then drown out the actual proof that exists. So 80% of people believe the skincare industry is rife with wrong advice, as reported by Women's Health. Also, for too long, beauty and aesthetics have been dominated by narrow, often unattainable standards of beauty, a somewhat Caucasian and certainly a youth-focused ideal, amplified by the language of anti-aging. The problem with this is the narrowing of beauty ideals, whatever the culture, is that the majority then either can't meet these ideals or many then expend huge amounts of labour in terms of time, effort, emotional energy and money to meet impossible ideals. Ageing then adds more biological and cultural pressure. A report from the Royal Society for Public Health found that 1 in 4 millennials believe older people can never really be thought of as attractive. So perhaps that isn't a reflection of age itself, but of a culture that has devalued it. To explore these topics, as well as some of the latest scientific theories, I'm joined by Dr. Stephanie Manson Brown. As Vice President of Research and Development and Global Head of Clinical Development, Scientific Innovation and Skincare at Allergan Aesthetics, Stephanie is a visionary medical doctor, surgically trained and currently leading groundbreaking global research that's not only advancing our understanding of aging on a molecular level, but also championing diversity and inclusivity in clinical practice. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say I'm so excited to be here with you on your podcast. So thank you very much for inviting me to be a guest.
Oh no, I am so pleased to have you here. I think we need to go straight in. You know, you lead scientific innovation around the world and have been doing this within this space for many, many years. I know that you're confronted with myths all the time, and particularly with longevity and health span becoming a huge trend right now. So what are some of the biggest myths that you have to fight scientifically every day in your career?
When we think about myths, one of the biggest ones really for me, and you see it a lot on social media, this misconception that you are taking preclinical data in the lab and then translating that into the clinical setting or into real life and into the real world setting. And that's something that is so complex and is very difficult to do. So my team are responsible for designing clinical trials, and to go from preclinical, and that's, you know, with the different models that are lab-based, to then translate that into the human being and then on a larger population scale is actually very difficult, because by the true nature, humans are noisy. So there's so many influencing factors. Therefore, you see and you hear a lot of people making some very wide-reaching claims with regards to you need to do this or you need to do that, and that is going to have a benefit to you. But it's very difficult to actually drill into and distill down to whether that's going to be a benefit for you. And I would say one of my biggest lessons on being part of the science of aging and running that platform is the more we hear from our experts, the more for me, I'm thinking this is such a complex issue. And the whole aging and the mechanisms around aging is complex. So there was a really interesting and a seminal paper that was published in 2013. And this really defined what we call the hallmarks of aging. And this outlined a series of different cellular and molecular mechanisms and pathways that are related to aging. But what's really interesting is that it was defined nicely into a set number and then increased a couple of years ago, adding on a couple more like chronic inflammation, for example. Underneath those hallmarks of aging, you have tens of thousands of different cellular pathways and mechanisms that are connecting them all. So I think that's one of the things that really highlights for me is that there's not one size fits all. There's not one silver bullet. There's not one diet or one, let's say, pharmaceutical product.
Or supplement.
That's suddenly going to be the game changer. Nor does it mean that it can be taken in isolation that doesn't fit into kind of a more general lifestyle choice, for example. And so from that point of view, I think it's very difficult to kind of decipher exactly what advice do you take and which, aspect of the longevity advice do you follow. There's a whole consortium set up to be able to try and establish this is around biomarkers. And it's such a buzzword. There's so much potential with biomarkers. And then to be able to make sure that you've identified a biomarker, you need to then be able to correlate it.
How does it show up in the actual human?
Exactly.
Is it just a lab result? Or is it actually showing up in terms of symptoms, in terms of the actual aging signs that we see?
Exactly.
This is such an important point to start with. So what you're saying is it's an oversimplification overall. And to assume that what is happening in an animal study or in vitro, so in just in the lab and in whatever, translating that and then taking it immediately into, therefore, you can then take this as a human or you can do this as a human will equal X in terms of an outcome. There's a huge jump with that. And I think as both of us, as doctors who've worked in biotech and pharma and been investigators in clinical trials, actually going from those in vitro or preclinical situations, creating clinical trials, I mean, it takes a long time. And as you're saying, humans are aging for much longer. So that must be really frustrating for you to then see the buzzwords and all of these trends popping up and overnight experts.
So there is a lot of positive intent out there, but there is also, to your point, people jumping on that bandwagon. And I think also commoditizing that wellness and the well-being element of it.
Couldn't agree more.
And I think that's something that can be really challenging to be able to then discern what is actually worth me actually spending my money and investing in and what is actually going to inform me. Whereas, what is something that has actually been fully researched and then translated. I think social media has enabled a lot of people to have that platform to present themselves as if they know all the details and they have distilled down very complex scientific messages into something very simple, which can then be misrepresented as a deep understanding. And I read on Instagram just recently, Adam Grant, occupational psychologist, who actually was really, really important that he was saying that TikTok signs can leave you overconfident in your knowledge. And that he was saying that beware of mistaking familiarity for fluency. And this is so important. Soundbites are not substitutes for systematic studies and research. People are now given this platform without necessarily having the credentials to be really speaking with authority on this topic. And I think in the mainstream or the traditional media, there were more gatekeeping stages to be able to then share an opinion or share your journalism. And there's so many buzzwords out there.
What kind of buzzwords would you say the audience needs to look out for?
That is a good question.
Yeah.
And I would say at the moment, the longevity is being used. Clean as well. You see clean a lot. And I think that's something that can be misconstrued as being also associated with natural. And it's interesting there, and there's a lot of really great scientists on Instagram and social media trying to help people understand that clean and natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's better for you, and also identifying that there are chemicals in nature that are poisonous and bad for you. So it's this confusion around the fact that that's necessarily something good. Organic as well, that's often overused and not necessarily, kind of substantiated with true organic roots or organic processes. Also well-being. It's an interesting one because, and you and I have spoken about well-being in the past, well-being is so much more than, I think, sometimes the frenzy that's out there in social media that you have to be doing X, Y, and Z that then helps with your self-care. I think self-care is overused. I think self-care is really important. But a lot of the time it is people feeling pressurized to invest in certain elements around their well-being and self-care that maybe are not necessarily benefiting, and it's almost a catch-22 when you see that instead of actually really promoting self-care, it's actually causing a lot of cognitive anxiety, for example.
This is something I've been thinking about a lot, and I've been reflecting on how it's actually become performative. So again, in terms of performative beauty and other aspects of things now, if our own health is becoming performative, does it look like we're choosing the right things in terms of dietary and exercise and whatever? And how are we portraying ourselves with that? Are people actually living within the moment of self-care and getting the benefits that they need, even from simple habits and tasks? And I am concerned about that. Because we've seen it in so many other aspects of health as well. So when I was doing some research on clean beauty, I saw that there was a huge percentage of consumers that wouldn't be able to understand what clean beauty even is. And again, these words around sustainability and again, organic. I hear it a lot in clinical practice where maybe a new patient might come to me and they'll say, I really only want to use natural products, clean products, and it has to be organic. And it's like, okay, let's break that down. And in terms of, as you say, from a botanical element into what a chemical truly is. I mean, so I think that's really, really clear that we need to be looking out for those buzzwords.
And I think what's also out there as well, especially in the skincare world, is a lot of the research is on the in vitro setting, and it's actually on the active ingredient rather than the end product itself. True. And so one of the things I think is important, and again, it's very easy for me to sit and say this because, my team are an R&D skincare team, from formulation to identifying, ensuring that we've got the regulatory aspect identified, safety, but the biological research that goes into it. So end to end, and then obviously helping to distill the science out there and when it is out on the market. But I think it's very important to decipher, are there clinical trials out there that then, translate what the claims are with regards to that initial in vitro studies out into the clinic. Now, with the cosmeceuticals, you don't have to do clinical trials to get those products out in the market. It's far more highly regulated when it's drugs, and also regulated from a device point of view.
Yes.
But I think it is really important if you're going to be spending a lot of money, because at the end of the day, not everyone can afford the really expensive products, which often are associated with the clinical trials, because that's a big investment. It is a huge investment. Yes. It goes into the millions of dollars just to even run a clinical trial sometimes. But I think this is something that, is important to go back and have a look to see what are the claims being made on, and then, make your decision with regards to whether it is worthwhile you then investing in that product.
Complicated.
It is.
It's complicated. And I did see some information that 80% of women and 74% of men say the skincare industry is flooded with misinformation, and 79% feel overwhelmed. And it's not surprising. I think recently I heard a quote that there was around about 1,800 different types of skincare brands available in the UK. And again, it's very similar to the expansion and the amplification through social media, where you can do a natural, organic mix within the kitchen, and then overnight you're rolling out a skincare brand, but you're using the buzzwords of natural, etc. When actually, what is it based on? It's much easier to get that to market in front of people than going down this hugely ethical pathway that you're describing end to end, where you're not just describing clinical trials within skincare, you're describing actually getting the individual active ingredients that the claims are associated with and proving that within a formulation. That's a lot of work, and that takes a lot of time versus things that can be relatively very, very fast to market. But let's move on to how you can bring evidence-based research into society that's relevant for listeners. I read a report that said that 50% of people don't trust products within medical aesthetics, claims within medical aesthetics because of safety. And that's something that, again, in the papers that we've been involved with and my work with Allergan Aesthetics, we found time and time again. It's not just a barrier, but it is in the fact that many people want to embark on skincare or medical aesthetics for empowerment and for all these different reasons. But, they're concerned about the safety. And they're people who are reflecting and considering their own health. So what are the practical applications of this, for consumers?
It's so important to go and see a qualified healthcare provider who has got a long history with regards to the aesthetic treatment.
Yes.
And providing aesthetic treatments. I think sometimes it's helpful as well to go to those who are investigators. You've been an investigator on many, many of our clinical trials. I think that helps to provide that experience. Now, obviously, not everyone's going to be an investigator in our clinical trial, but that is one element that's helpful. But I would say it is distilling the safety and efficacy information through the healthcare provider. And I think, you mentioned, and thank you for mentioning that in the introduction, something that I have been incredibly passionate about as well for many, many years, before it was potentially a buzzword, exactly, around diversity and inclusion, is ensuring that we are doing everything we can to bring in a population that is representative of the wider population in our clinical trials. And it's interesting because in medical research, traditionally it's actually men, white men, on the therapeutic side. And when I mean therapeutic, that's for medical conditions. So when you look at aesthetic trials, it's actually the other way around. It's women, but it's white women that are most commonly and studied and the research is conducted on.
Yes.
That is not representative of the entire population. And that's something that's so important because we need to be making sure that we are representing the needs both from an outcomes perspective, and when we talk about efficacy outcomes, that's about the aesthetic outcomes, whether that's looking at skin health or if it's volume replacement, different elements, helping with wrinkles. That is really, really important for us to be demonstrating that it is efficacious in lots of different ethnicities, different age groups, different genders.
Yes.
And I think that's also, we will continue as well to be looking at genders when it relates to gender diversity as well. I think that's so important because none of us, we're not monolithic, and that term's used quite a lot nowadays, but it's so powerful.
Definitely. I've got to thank you for a huge amount of the work that you've done in this space for spearleading diversity and inclusion within clinical trials, because for so long before we were always talking about this, and I was hearing about it from patients, but also in the studies that I've been involved with where, there has been investigators from different countries involved in the big studies, and subjects, patients, would say we need to understand if it's going to be safe for my skin type. Is it safe for me? And that is something that unless you've been confronted with that, either in your own history or your family history, as you say, people overlook that. And it's not always necessarily safe in every different type of population. So I'd like to thank you for that. And it's always been a really honest and purposeful voice that you've led with that. So thank you. This episode is sponsored by SkinCeuticals. I performed the clinical research and launched Petiox peptide serum by SkinCeuticals to the medical community. Along with my international colleagues, I published on the real-world impact of Petiox serum. We found that it targets lines caused by repetitive muscle movement, as well as smoothen other more difficult-to-treat wrinkles. With a precisely calibrated blend of peptides and PHAs, I use Petiox personally and with my patients to help soften lines, refine skin texture, and boost radiance for that luminous glass skin finish. You can redeem an exclusive 15% discount on Petiox serum at my clinic. Follow the link in the show notes for more information. Stephanie, something that is so important to both of us, and we've talked about a lot over the years, are the critical influences that are impacting beauty and aging ideals and cultures. Where would you like to start with this topic?
Well, my goodness, it's such a big topic and you're absolutely spot on. We have been talking about it for so long, and it is so important that we are kindred spirits in this, and our mission to really break down those barriers to ageism. I think that's important just to start there.
Yes.
The reason being is that I feel, and you and I feel so strongly about this, it is probably one of the last remaining acceptable prejudices that sit out there in discrimination. And it is very much kind of, I would say, core of part of our societal evaluation of people in society, from the point of view that aging is still got so many negative connotations associated with it.
From the Royal Society for Public Health, 1 in 3 people surveyed believed older adults are incompetent and incapable. Millennials' negative attitudes towards aging. 40% believe dementia is an inevitable part of aging, and 25% think depression in older age is simply normal. And this is what we're hoping for, a core philosophical shifts, isn't it? We've both battled on the podiums, within clinical trials, wherever we can, advisory boards, in terms of diversity and inclusion. But this, I mean, within my own practice, as you know, I employ actually the majority of my staff are over 60. And so I really believe in the worth and the value that those generations can bring.
Definitely.
How can we break down this even further within medical aesthetics and beauty and skincare?
So first of all, I absolutely love the title of your podcast.
Thank you.
I love the fact that you are, addressing this topic head on and actually giving it airtime. I think the more we talk about it, there are groups out there who are really championing for this and are activists behind this. But I think the more we talk about it, the necessary, that it's necessary to be breaking down those stereotypes. And there's things that we can do as an industry. I mean, you and I both work in an industry that has actually pretty much been the perpetrators of this notion of ageism, and that there are beauty standards that are associated with the attainment of younger. That's something that is really seen to be the ultimate goal. And it is decades old. Even I understand that there's that kind of association that younger equals better, and therefore it's also, there's lots of people who'll get up on podium and say it's biological, which I think is just something we need to stop saying that.
Okay,
that
break that down for us. Why that's important to understand.
I think it's important to understand because it's based on the reproductive aspect of biological nature.
Yes, and that's where beauty then comes in. Beauty ideals feed back in to these beliefs and these narrow perceptions.
Exactly. And some of the statistics that you just quoted there is because this is perpetuated through all the different outlets. The age is inevitably associated with negative outcomes. And I think this is something we're seeing a movement, we're seeing a shift with regards to generations. And generations are I think, just generally getting younger, and we need to celebrate that. A lot of it is to do with increased medical advances, for example, that has enabled a lot of the conditions that potentially impacted life and, you know, continuation out to later lives have alleviated that dramatically. But I think it's also just the fact that there is a greater understanding of how to take certain measures to live a healthier lifestyle. I think there's also this concept that, you know, there is important interplay as well from an intergenerational perspective. And that, you know, you mentioned your team that work with you. I think that that is so important because we need to recognize that with age brings just that clarity with regards to kind of understanding how to put things into context. I think also interacting with people. And I think it's not to say that one age group is better than the other. No. It's about celebrating and also respecting the different time points in one's life. And I think also this, so kind of going back to what I was saying about the fact that you and I work in this industry that does perpetuate these stereotypes, we need to stop talking about, and I'm going to pause, anti-aging, or from a US perspective, anti-aging. That is so detrimental. To even put the word anti, which is negative, in front of aging, and it's in longevity and aging science as well. I've seen there's a real pickup of that term.
Oh, you've seen an increase?
Oh yeah, definitely. Where they're talking about anti-aging interventions to modify and to modulate aging. And I think it's something that, you know, we've been talking about aging science, and I'm very much supporting. So I'm not contradicting myself here, but I'm very supportive of the promotion of healthy aging.
Yes.
But it's not anti-aging, because I think we need to be
too.
able to kind of celebrate the fact that with age comes confidence, but we need to help people get that confidence as well as maintain that confidence. It's the wisdom, it's putting things into perspective. There is so much continuation of life as you continue.
I think for my patients, some of them do find it quite reassuring to walk in through the door of a medical clinic and see faces again that they might be able to relate to, or, you know, they may have spent time out of the workplace and want to return to the workplace much later on. And, you know, I think again, it's about having people that represent longevity, health span, medical aesthetics, beauty within the industry that a broader population can relate to and can tell relevant stories and, you know, help people to feel heard and seen. So I think that is really, really helpful. Again, here's something from the UK Parliament committees saying by 2035, the UK population aged 80 will rise over 50%. I mean, it's big, right? Yeah. And of course, that has economic impacts.
And just on that one, and I hope you don't mind me interjecting there, but I think that that's why aging science and longevity medicine does take such an important role. So this is where we are going to be living older, and we need to be investing in the right avenues of aging science to understand how we can be looking at ways to help that aging element from a cognitive point of view. You know, also just from a musculoskeletal perspective.
Yes,
because
it's very important. These
are just two therapeutic areas, cardiovascular, you know, looking at endocrinology as well. And I think these are areas that actually is so important for the different stakeholders involved, whether it's policymakers, you know, governments. It's about looking at the industry itself. It's the medical profession coming together and the professional bodies to really support our understanding of how to promote healthy aging, to bring in that element of enabling people into later life, because it has got huge, big economic benefits for society at large.
Yes. And actually, on Ageless, I'm actually bringing on experts in all of those different fields.
Amazing.
To not just break it down to basics, but actually have some foresight in terms of the pipeline of what might be happening in the future in terms of medical developments. And again, a lot of just hopefully clearing up quite a lot of the misinformation that's out there. And, again, just going to your point around anti or anti-aging and the resurgence of that, it's so fear-based. And what I'm observing is now in clinical practice is people becoming obsessed with health span and longevity. So they're increasing their fear of death. And I think that takes us on to a completely different philosophical tangent, but I think it's also really important to acknowledge that in this conversation is that it is increasing fear.
Definitely.
Of what is perceived as a decline.
There's lots of data out there to show that young people, like young teenagers, are fearful of wrinkles, they're fearful of aging.
Absolutely.
And they're the
correct.
ones who are kind of tapping into skincare far too early when it's actually they're youthful, but their skin should not be having the impact of active ingredients that are better suited for skin that is older or more mature, for example. We have to reframe this notion of older is bad, younger is better, and just accept that it's on a whole spectrum. And therefore, there will be different time points that, yes, you want to consider introducing certain interventions into your lifestyle, but it should not be
An obsession.
Or driven by fear.
Yes. We did a survey because I was really fascinated to find that such a large percentage of my community are actually Gen Z in terms of my audience. And we found that they had an increased fear of aging versus millennials. That was really interesting. And then, of course, speaking to the Generation Alpha and how they're being made a huge target for skincare, I think it's absolutely frightening. Of course, we advocate prevention and health prevention and skin prevention, etc. Of course, we both do as medical doctors, but this is on a completely different level.
Exactly, and it's about maintenance of health. That's what you and I are about. It's the maintenance of health to then lead into health span.
Fundamentally. Yeah. So then going on to another topic, which is influencers. Of course, we touched on this before. And many have really good intentions, etc. And we know that and we acknowledge those that do. Given the fact that this could become quite a global health crisis in terms of misinformation, disinformation, where do you think the future of influencers is going? And how can we help to empower listeners to make better choices?
That is quite a big question. And I think it's a very difficult one to tackle. Because I completely agree with you in the fact that this is potentially, I think it already might be there from a global misinformation, potentially a global health crisis if you're getting all of that, misinformation and misleading data out there and people speaking on behalf of being experts.
And acting on it.
And acting on it as well, because we know that when misinformation is out there, it increases levels of mistrust. It also increases levels of risk-taking behavior.
Okay.
And people listening to those who are talking about their own experience, but is not based on public health and epidemiology data.
Right.
And I would always be saying, go back to the scientific literature, which is, available through your healthcare provider. But one thing that kind of makes me pause a little bit when I say that is I read an article in the New York Times back at the beginning of this month saying that fraudulent scientific papers is on the increase as well. So where do we go? And there are what they term paper mills that are establishments that are churning out fraudulent papers. They're actually getting scientists and healthcare professionals to purchase an authorship on those papers to then obviously enhance their credibility, and I use quotations around the word credibility.
Indeed.
And so it is a very challenging situation.
False science, basically.
False science.
So we're going from false news to false science. And actually, in the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 emails approaching me about this very subject.
There you go.
And you can essentially buy your way in. And actually, I find that very frustrating, as I know you will, for those of us who have worked really hard getting any paper across the line is so much work. The amount of effort we put into our academic careers, it can take up a huge amount of time and effort.
Yeah.
And, we can get many rejections, and we have to keep pursuing things that we believe in. And that's really, really hard. So I'm really glad that there is becoming an awareness of that as well. So where do I think the responsibility lies? I think it comes back down to ethics. I think that whilst we can hold the scientific journals, responsible, absolutely, each individual doctor, healthcare practitioner, at the end of the day, is part of our ethics,
Absolutely. And I do want to ask you a question, because I feel that I'm sure you've got thoughts on this, but what is the future from the influencer's perspective as well? Because I know that there are different trends, and there was a celebrity influencer, and then it would kind of expanded out to the influencer just full stop, regardless of whether they had celebrity status or not. What are your thoughts about the future?
I think where things will start to hopefully improve is, and I likened it to as doctors when we're on a scientific podium. So whenever we're invited to speak at scientific congress, etc., we have to put our disclaimers up as one of the first slides that goes up. So how are we being financially compensated by different companies that might actually be involved in any of the content that we're about to speak to? And that is something that we have to do as doctors when we're speaking in scientific audience. So I read quite a bit of different data that was saying it was really low percentages of influencers were actually showing their financial gain through what would be considered, an ad. Even as low as 10% were actually, there was enough information there that was making it clear that this was a financial advertisement behind it. So I think that's something that's really concerning. I think that there will be hopefully more improvement in terms of that. Again, I think that different companies are shifting now. Of course, there's big commercial gain to be had by having an influencer that, again, they're spending a lot of time on social media, any type of influence. I'm talking about medical influencers as well. There's a reason why they've become so influential. And it's usually they've got more time than the people who are actually in the field, on the ground, helping people day to day. When you're in a public service industry, that takes up most of your day. And then if you're also working within science or whatever else in academia, that's taking up your weekend. Where does social media come into it? And so that's why I felt that this was such an important platform to give voices to fellow experts who may not necessarily be heard, so that actually, hopefully we can reclaim a little bit back of our voices in terms of that. So I'm hoping that there will be a rise of expert influence and that those influencers that are out there will start to listen more, and spend more time in terms of education around getting the facts right. And I'm sure they will.
I love that. And it is about education, isn't it? And being very transparent and disclosing. And that's a key one. And I think also from the point of view of just bringing out the references, making sure it's clear what your source of information is.
Yes.
And then also I would say, ensuring that, from a point of view of different people trying to ascertain where they should be leaning with regards to getting their information, is to just being vigilant. And I think what's challenging, and I think certainly in the advent of social media and algorithms, critical thinking is a skill set that is potentially being eroded. And there's a lot of different publications out there talking about critical thinking, but I think that's something that needs to be brought in, certainly from an educational point of view, to help us humans critically appraise and to be able to decipher what's fact and fiction out there. But I love it.
Huge point. Let's just really emphasize and encourage us. It starts with ourselves.
Yes.
That critical thinking starts with ourselves, to just step back and reduce down the scrolling and read more and think more about every choice that we're making. I love that you've brought that in. And then moving forward, obviously you're at the forefront of so many different aspects, skincare and in terms of, aging science and medical aesthetics. You oversee so many different aspects. What are some of the exciting things that are coming up in terms of this space?
One of the areas that I'm really excited about is we have a team who are dedicated to building our digital technology and building applications as it relates to clinical research. And I think that does help with the aging science. And there's a really important element that we're looking at on building the representation through the imaging. I think that's something that is really important as we look at skin health. And being able to decipher what that exterior actually could be conveying from an underlying biological aspect.
Yes.
Also, there's a team working at, and we talked about what we can be doing to break down the stereotypes of aging, bring in patient-reported outcomes. So that's questionnaires that we have and we include in our clinical trials that speak about positive aging outcomes rather than saying, I look X years younger. So it's really about celebrating how different aesthetic treatments can actually be impacting a positive aging and just that confidence and that the psychosocial element of things. So those are really exciting.
I love the patient-reported outcomes. Whenever I'm involved in any form of clinical trial, I actually find it so insightful to hear from the patients themselves and their perspectives. And I think it also gives them an opportunity to see for themselves the positive aspects that can be brought from having that more critical thought and the self-reflection. So the sorts of questions that we ask are, how quickly can you return back to social engagement, or how has this made you feel? And this is really important part of science too.
Yeah.
So just finally, I've got a few key little questions for you. What do you think is some of the best healthcare advice or mindset advice even have you ever received?
That is a great question. I think it kind of goes back to a concept that we were talking about earlier around introducing some simple aspects into just your day-to-day. I think there's an information overload. The virtual element makes us available potentially 24/7. Yeah. And it's also about my biggest, act of self-care is about getting out into nature every day, as well as taking like 10 minutes out of my day to do something like breath work or to do meditation. So powerful. That 10 minutes is my space just to switch off the brain, really kind of give my parasympathetic nervous system a hug, basically, for want of a better phrase. And it just helps me then continue to be more focused. So that advice, I think, is out there, but it's also my paying it forward and giving advice to others.
Thank you for that. So many doctors and experts that I speak to, they just bring it back down to these beautiful basics. And I think that speaks volumes when somebody who is leading up globally so many different scientific breakthroughs and you're still distilling it back down. And then finally, I want to ask you, what does feeling ageless mean to you?
Great question. I think from my perspective, it is having confidence throughout my existence and drilling into the more important elements. Age does not define me.
Okay.
And I have got so many more important contributions to myself, to my friends, to my family, to my work, to society that is ageless.
Exactly right. Stephanie, we could keep talking for a long time. I think there's a lot that we're still not touched on, but I have to thank you for coming in. I know you have an extremely busy schedule, so thank you for coming in and sharing so much of this scientific wisdom with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast as a guest, and it's been an absolute pleasure, and we could keep talking for a long time. But thank you so much.
Thank you. With 80% of women feeling overwhelmed by wrong information and 50% of consumers unsure about safety in medical aesthetics, trust and evidence have never been more crucial. Here are 3 actionable tips. Number 1, choose expertise. Before you commit to any treatment or product, Do your due diligence. Ask the practitioner the name of the product being used and for the scientific evidence behind their claims. Ask about their qualifications, their training, and the clinical data for the products they use. Look for peer-reviewed studies in humans with real outcomes. Number 2, a social media cleanse. Scrutinize the voices in beauty that you're following. Are the influencers or celebrities you follow noise or news? For these subjects, seek out against the algorithms, medical experts who offer credible, evidence-based advice. Number 3, think consistency over hacks. My patients with the best long-term results see their skin health as a lifelong investment, not a quick fix. Focus on daily actions that support your long-term aesthetic health, like a consistent medical-grade skincare routine that contains active ingredients at a high level of efficacy, and a nutrition, exercise, and stress management plan that you'll actually stick to. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. If this episode helped, please share it with a friend who could benefit. Send us questions for future episodes, follow us for more insights, and subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation, uncovering the truth about healthy aging, self-development, and medical aesthetics. As Stephanie so insightfully reminded us today, by choosing proof and investing in cultural awareness, shifting from a fear-driven anti-aging narrative to a proactive, empowering pro-longevity mindset, we can see measurable results as a society, with individuals living on average 7.5 years longer and having lower dementia risk. It's clear that the stories we tell each other, as well as ourselves, about aging matter. So I leave you with this question. What false beliefs do you have about aging?